And then for other people, based on how important it is to them, they might say their race or their ethnicity. So, you know, saying I'm Native American, or more specifically for some, Otham, Mexican, white. Some may say their social position, parent, student, professor, basketball player. And we've kind of talked about social position when we talked about social identity theory, but we're going to kind of go back to that. Some people will mention place, such as the Otham Nation, TOCC, cells, Tucson. Some mention relationships, single, married, divorced. It is complicated. And sometimes, but less often, sometimes age and religion. Some people, if it's important to them, state about their sexuality. It all depends on how salient those aspects of an individual lives are. So this one's probably a little less common, but some people still do it. But so what we're going to do based on this is kind of go through each of these and look at how we define them based upon what we know about studies dealing, for example, with gender, studies dealing with culture, about people's place and social position and race and ethnicity. We're going to talk about relationships and how we define those. And then we're going to look at things like discrimination and bias, along with all the other aspects that comes with. So that's kind of where we're headed. And it looks like the first on our list for at least tonight is gender. So we're going to take a look at gender and how gender is defined, at least from what we consider a scientific perspective. But it is important to note that sometimes science and culture don't always mix. So that's something to keep in mind as we have this conversation. So the first question that we often want to know up front is, how do we define gender? Because the term gender is actually a pretty recent one as we use it today. When we look at the origins of the word gender, before about the 1970s, the word gender was actually a medical term that defines someone who has some physical abnormality that makes it so one could not be classified as either male or female. Now, we need to speak this right up front. Male and female is your biological designation from kind of a science perspective, okay? So male, female is whether you have, for example, external genitalia or internal genitalia, and those other secondary sex qualities. But the term gender was actually something that was taken from the feminist researchers in the 1970s to designate the difference between sex, the biological difference between males and females, and their psychological or social differences, or their gender. Because what especially the earliest feminists argued is that there's a difference between our biology and our psychology and social differences. And we can see this in cross-cultural studies. You know, in some cultures, it's actually if we compare it to our Western culture, with males being dominant, females being submissive and more nurturing. It should be dominance versus nurturing. In some cultures, it's the difference. It's the opposite. It's the female that tends to be more dominant, and the female who is more dominant, and the male is more nurturing. Okay, and the feminists wanted to differentiate these two things because they also explain a lot of differences when it comes to things like sexual preference, gender identity, how one identifies with their sex, and the like. So really the term gender comes from, it to be a medical term. And then in the 70s, just as a quick review, it was kind of usurped by the feminist movement to denote the difference between biological differences between males and females and psychological and social differences between males and females, okay? And what this did is it allowed researchers to really look at the psychological and social qualities of men and women to really understand why there's these differences, not just based on, for example, hormone panels or the type of genitalia they have, the size of their muscular body, because in the end, we'll see that those end up being a wash when it comes to comparing both genders. And so there has to be some psychological or social differences that really tell us something about gender. So, and if we look at the traditional approach to studying gender, we think of it from what's called the dichotic approach. The dichotic approach simply states that that really men and women are two separate things, two separate kinds. Okay, it goes back to there's been some popular books. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, arguing that there's just huge differences between men and women that they can't be taken into consideration as a single species. And this then came to, a lot of comparisons between men and women. A lot of studies still talk about gender differences and the like. So it's had a huge influence on the way we look at the human condition. When we look at research, when we look at things, everyone always wants to know, is there a difference between men and women? Largely, we'll take a look at that as we move along. But this is the traditional way we've tended to look at gender, is in this very dichotic way, okay? But when we measure gender, even on a biological level, we actually see that there's a lot of variation, okay? And if we look at these things, we can see that a large number of individuals do fit in those two dichotic categories of complete male, of being male with external genitalia, or female having internal genitalia. But we also have to note that there's overlap between these two genders. They overlap. We call these people intersex, and these tend to be individuals who are born with both internal and external genitalia. Okay, so we know from a physical biological level, there is differences between individuals of how much male, female they are. And in some cases, they tend to be both. But when we look at it from a chemical perspective, and when we look at, is there a male that is completely hormonal male, and is there a female that is completely hormonal female? The answer is no. You won't find a 100% complete male, and you won't find a 100% complete female. We see, and as these graphs show, there's few people here, and then we have this curve, okay? And we will find that there's more or less men with more testosterone. If we were to put testosterone on this side and we put estrogen on this side, but we can see that they start to intermix over the population to where there's really not a complete male with a complete testosterone male hormone and a female that is completely estrogen based or female hormone based. And so from a biological perspective, what this suggests is that we're all variable on this continuum between complete male to complete female, okay? Now, if we look at it now to look at the gender, we see that for the most part, a lot of males will identify as men or a man, and females will identify as a woman. And again, from a biological perspective, this makes sense given the reproductive qualities between men and women. But we also note that in between these two things of how you feel about your sex, that we have a wider range of what we call two different gender identities. Okay, so for example, a transgendered person can be a individual that is born male, but has more of an identification as a woman, and vice versa, born woman that has more identification with masculine or man traits or male traits. And on a larger level, these individuals actually feel as if they were born in the wrong body. Okay. Two-spirited is a term that a lot of Native American communities have started to regain. In quite a few Native American communities, there was actually special designations for individuals who were two-spirited because it was believed that they had both the essence of a male and the essence of a female. And so they were very prized within the communities because they could do a lot of things that for the woman side of the camp, that's easier for them. And then on the male side of the camp, they could do the same things. And they were also seen as kind of having a special thing because they have both the knowledge of maleness and femaleness. Of course, when colonization happened and the dichotomism of Christianity occurred, this was taken out of a lot of communities, and it's been just the recent last decades that a lot of Native American communities are starting to regain this sense of people who are considered two-spirited. Okay. Genderqueer is one I always like to talk about. This is an individual, whether they're male, biologically male or female, their gender identity, they take it to an extreme. And so I always like saying this because, you know, it could be a male who, for example, is transgendered, and so they dress very buoyantly, they dress very feminine, they're very out there with their expression. But something that people also don't understand is that also means that a male who acts extremely masculine or very manly, they're also called a genderqueer. I've always asked if there was a student ever willing to ask a very masculine man if they consider themselves queer, but no one has taken me up on that thing. I think it might be a social reason. But we also see genderqueer female who either strongly identify as female as well, are what you would define as genderqueer, or females who strongly identify as male in the same boat. But it's just a person who strongly identifies and is very proud of their gender identity. Okay. When we look at gender expressions, so, you know, the way we typically see male, man, masculine, female, woman, feminine. Okay, masculinity noted by dominance, strength, femininity marked by nurturing and caring. You can think of it a hard to soft kind of personalities. And then in between, we have androgynous. These are individuals who they're because of their gender identity, maybe some of their biology and stuff, they don't act neither masculine or feminine. And so they're an individual that just doesn't identify or express either way. The part of this that becomes confusing is our gender identity does not always equal our gender expression. And this is an important note to make. Because there are times where an individual who identifies as a woman and identifies as being feminine can, in a certain situation, such as a threat to their children or a threat to themselves, act very dominant and masculine. One of my favorite little quotes from that I see on Facebook and memes is, I don't care how old you are or how strong you think you are. When a 3 or 4-year-old hands you a phone, you answer it. Because there are situations in which very masculine men can act and behave very nurturing and caring. Okay. So the point of this is our gender identity does not always equal our gender expression. Okay. And we can note these differences just based upon the situation a person is in. Okay. So again, when we're following this line, we can see man, male, man, masculine, the traditional dichotic. So sexual orientation towards women, female, woman, feminine, towards men. Okay. And again, this definitely has some biological underpinnings for reproductive purposes, but not always. Okay, we know that, for example, a man can be attracted and have a sexual orientation towards another man, and vice versa with women. And in this, we can see that there is another, and we'll see more here in just a minute, another diversity of sexual orientations, two of them that can be noted, and sometimes they're confused with each other, especially when a person is very dichotic in their thinking as bisexuals versus pansexuals. Okay. A bisexual is someone who has a primary sexual attraction. So it might be a male who is attracted to women, but they can also find themselves sexually attracted to a different sex. So in this case, it would be a man attracted to another man. But bisexuals tend to have a primary attraction. They also, given the word bi means that it's either male or female that they can be sexually attracted to. Okay. Pansexuals, on the other hand, do not have a primary sexual attraction. Okay, they equally like women and men equally, and as the term pan suggests, a big pan is all circling. They can also be attracted to someone who, for example, is transgendered, someone who is intersex, somebody who is androgynous. Okay, so the term pan denotes two things. One, there is no primary attraction, gender attraction. And two, it can include more than just men and women as they're traditionally defined. Some recent research suggests that pansexuals are, their attraction is more about personality than it is about physical aspects of an individual's bodies. So this will be interesting research because that does suggest that they do have a primary sexual preference, but it's just not based on physical features or gender features. It's based more on personality. So that'll be kind of some interesting research to look out for, at least from a gender study perspective. And just like with gender identity and gender expression, we have sexual behaviors. And again, if we look at the traditional lines, this way, and when we look at this way, but we do have to note that one's gender orientation does not equal their sexual behavior. All right. So just some kind of interesting studies on both genders. Okay. I had a colleague once who was studying personal ads. I think it was on, it's when Craigslist used to have personal ads. I don't think they do anymore, but I'm not sure. And he was studying male to male encounters. And of course, once he gained their trust and everything and revealed that, hey, he's actually a researcher, he asked about their sexual orientation and everything like that. And what he found is that about, I think it was 73 or 74, okay, let's just go 74% of the male to male ads were straight men looking for other male encounters. And of that 74%, 86% of them were in an intimate relationship with a female. So you have individuals who have a sexual orientation of heterosexual, and many of them were in a heterosexual relationship, or what we call cisgender relationship, but they were seeking male encounters. Okay. We also know that when people are put in places where they don't have the selection of a sexual partner, that they will engage in sexual behavior with whatever is available. We can see this in especially prisons that are very isolated. And this is kind of the whole idea that when in prison, males will have sex with males and females will have sex with females, even if that's not their sexual orientation, but that's what's available to them. Okay. When we look at research on females, even with women who are considered cisgender, or what we traditionally would call heterosexual, and we show them pictures of females, of other females, either in erotic or what would be considered stereotypical beauty for that gender. We find that about 70% of women who identify as cisgender will have a biological sexual response to pictures of other women. So maybe not on the mental level, but we see on the biological level that a good number of women will have a sexual response, even though they may be more attracted or psychologically attracted to men. And so these are the point of this, though, is one, our gender identity doesn't always equal our gender expression. And if the situation is right, our sexual orientation doesn't always meet our sexual behaviors. And so those are things to kind of keep in mind about gender and sexuality. And if we were to look at it from a less linear perspective, we can see that, we have sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex assignment at birth. And then we do a Venn diagram and we have you somewhere here in the middle, okay? So what I would like everybody to do is kind of look through this list. And if there's any of these terms that you're not sure about or you're questioning about, please let me know in the chat and we'll go over them. I have found through the years of doing this, the first year giving this type of lecture, there were only a few of these terms that everyone knew. But then as the years have gone by, and I think due to technology, there's less and less questions about a lot of these. So I like to leave it open to the class. Please don't be embarrassed, but please put in the chat if there's any of these that you don't understand. Okay. Thank you, Tashina. I'm going to underline that one. And this is one that I like going over. I want to hit on asexual. Anyone else? cisgender. Okay, thank you, Shannon. Two-spirited. Trying to remember where that one is. Intersex. It's not letting me. I'll do a little arrow. A little bar is preventing me from underlining it. Okay. Fluid. Okay. So let's go over these, and then if there's any other questions about any of the other ones, please let me know. And let's go ahead. Let's start with intersex. Intersex is an individual that is born with both male and female genitalia. Hold on just a second. The old term for intersex was actually hermaphrodite, or someone who is hermaphroditic. The reason why they changed it to intersex is because of the amazing discrimination and sometimes torture that term brought about. So they changed the word hermaphrodite to intersex. And it's just to denote a person who is born with both male or female genitalia. I would say that just to make some notes on intersex, many times the person's identity is assigned by the doctor at birth. So it's really left to the doctor to determine whether or not to give the child a penis or a vagina, depending upon that doctor's view. There are a few states, I believe Colorado is one of them, that requires parents and doctors to wait for the child to be old enough to make their own determination. And then in other states, it is determined by the parents at birth. What we have found in studies is that it's dependent upon the child. Some children in those states that the child decides, we find that some of them decide to keep both genitalias, but we have found that having the child choose their gender is actually the healthiest route. We find that a lot of times the doctors and the parents make mistakes in determining the gender of their child, and that ends up with a lot of confusion, which results in a lot of addiction issues, suicide issues, and those types of things. So Keisha, the question about breasts is that it really depends on the hormone panel of the individual. So I say they're born with both male and female genitalia, but dependent upon whether they're more estrogen prone or testosterone prone would determine those secondary sexual features such as breasts and those types of things. And again, if it's one of those, if the closer the hormone panel is towards the middle, they might develop both, but it really depends on the hormone panel. Mm-hmm. And that's also another reason why it's kind of important to, from at least a health perspective, to have the child have say in what their gender determination is, because by the age of 4 or 5, they know more or less kind of what their hormones are telling them. So they're more likely make a decision that would develop into those secondary sex qualities. So good question though. Okay. Let's go to femi. Femi is a term for a woman that is lesbian, meaning that she's attracted to other women, but she acts and behaves like what you would consider a traditional female who are attracted to men. And so a femi is again a female that is attracted to other females, but they act and behave very, very feminine, almost to the point that you would think that they were more of that traditional male-female person, and you wouldn't necessarily assume that they are lesbian or same-sex attraction. Okay. Androgynous is when you can't tell whether the person is masculine or feminine. So this is an individual, you know, if you've ever gone up to somebody and tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Hello, sir," and they turn around and it's a woman, or the other way around because of our own assumptions. This is someone who would be considered androgynous, that their gender expression, their gender, the way they express their gender is neither masculine or feminine. Okay. Cisgender. So cisgender is a term that was added. So if you look at gender orientation research or gender identity research, I wouldn't recommend looking anything, anything that is pre-2012. Because a lot of the research before 2012 was funded by pretty much special interest groups. There was no federal funding going towards gender identity and sexual orientation. But in 2012, the federal government started to release research funds where universities and stuff could actually start doing what you would call unbiased research. They weren't looking for any specific results. It was just research money available to research sexual orientation and gender identity. When that happened, they recognized that every gender identity and every gender orientation was compared to heterosexual people, heterosexual being men who are attracted to women and women who are attracted to men. Okay, I think we all probably know that term from you know, our lay communities. And what they realized is that created a bias in research, that we knew nothing about straight people, basically. And so this term cisgender is an individual who is what we term traditionally heterosexual, but their gender identity is that being a male being attracted to female and a female being attracted to male is really the only sexual orientation that there should be, and that anything outside of that is deviant. Okay, so this is kind of the gender identity of people who traditionally think of themselves as heterosexual, but then you add that other level of it's individuals who think that that should be the only sexual orientation. So that's cisgender. Two-spirited is, again, that's that traditional, in not all, we got to remember there's a lot of variability and differences between Native American tribes and nations, but a few Native American tribes had individuals and special designations for people who are what were considered two-spirited. Okay, two-spirited meaning that they have the essence of both men and women, and so they were given a special designation. And it's a term that has been taken back over the last couple decades in order to bring that traditional view of male, female back into those Native American communities that feel that it's important to recognize those individuals, because traditionally they were considered very special because they had both the essence of a male and the essence of the female. So they were often looked towards for advice and were looked for information and understanding of things like relationships and those types of things. So this is a term that's trying to be regained by some Native American tribes. Fluid. Okay, so I mentioned pansexual. Okay, pansexual is someone who doesn't have a primary sexual orientation, but will engage in sexual acts with same sex, different sex, and also in between. Fluid is kind of, I don't know how to put this without sounding weird about it. Fluid is the next level to that, okay? So a person who is pansexual, when they pick a sexual partner, will tend to start and complete the sexual act with that partner or that individual. Someone who is fluid can start with the male and finish with the female. Someone is fluid is someone that you would find somewhere like a place that provides a whole bunch of sexual services, including male and female. So someone who is fluid is someone who is pansexual. They don't have a primary orientation, but they also, with their sexual orientation, don't have a preference of the act itself, if that makes sense. That one's a little bit difficult to explain given pansexual, but they're kind of very similar. It's just the act itself doesn't necessarily have to be with a singular individual, okay? And then there was a question about same gender loving. Okay, David, same gender loving is, let's say a man who is masculine, okay, can be attracted to both another masculine man, but also a masculine female, or someone that would, if we go down here to this category of butch, butch is a female who expresses herself very masculine and male. So same gender orientation is someone who is attracted to either individuals that are just very masculine or individuals who are just very feminine in their nature. Okay. And then I want to hit on asexual. Again, asexual means no sexuality. Absence of, and sexual. Okay. The issue, I worked with quite a few asexuals when I ran a behavioral health center. And the first thing that I have to state about these individuals is an asexual, there's nothing wrong with them, okay? When we look at their hormone panels, when we look at their sexual functioning and everything is normal. They just lack the desire for sexual intercourse and sexual activity. And the thing that I want to express, and I'm going to get on a soapbox here for just a minute, is if you have a friend, if you have a family member who doesn't have a boyfriend, who doesn't go out and have sex, who has no interest in any of those things, I'm going to say this in the kindest way I can. Leave them the hell alone. There's nothing wrong with them. And the reason why I'm telling you this is I've worked with too many young people that have either been forced to have sex, even though they didn't want to, felt that there was something extremely wrong with them when there was nothing, felt like that they were a disappointment to their friends and their family and everything else when they shouldn't have been. There are just simply people who are not interested in sex. And so my soapbox is, if you have someone in your life who family is always picking on them about not having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, friends who are always saying, oh, why don't you have sex or anything like that, please step up for them. Tell everyone to leave them the hell alone, because I'll tell you what, I've worked with way too many suicidal individuals because of that situation. And it's a sad affair, and people should just keep their mouths shut when it comes to that. So off my soapbox. With that being said, one of the things, and the reason why I think this diagram is important, is because sexuality also fluctuates across the lifespan. And it's different for everyone. We know that women who are attracted to men will go through a period of time in their life where they'll look at other women and go, maybe. There's men who are attracted to other women who during a certain point of your life will go, well, maybe. And there's a period in both genders' life where sex will not be appealing at all. When we look at women who are attracted to men, they usually go through this period in their later 20s and again in their 40s. Men tend to go, and they do it again in their 60s. Men on average will experience this change in orientation in their later 40s and into their early 50s on average. We all, and like I said, we'll all go through periods of asexuality, and all of those things are normal. And so even when we think our orientations are fixed, we can see them fluctuate throughout the lifespan. And again, I'll tell you that for some people who have been fixed in this idea that only men should lie with women and women should lie with men, I've worked with a lot of individuals that become very confused during those periods of times when your sexuality is naturally fluctuating. So just please understand that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to change your belief systems or your values or anything else. It's just part of being a biological person. Okay. All right, with that being said, is there any other questions about sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sex assignment at birth? So Clarissa, yeah, gender queer is someone who takes their gender identity to an extreme. So this could be a man who who is very masculine and very, beat chest, or it can be a man who is very feminine. You can think of a lot of gender queers are like drag queens often identify as gender queer. But on the other hand, it can also be females. So a lot of butch females identify as gender queer because they can have a very extreme view of their masculinity. Okay. So gender queer is just this, you strongly identify with whichever gender you identify with. So. Any other questions? Okay. So let's go on and talk about some other issues dealing with, okay, so we talked about biology, we talked about attraction and behaviors and all of those types of things. But how do we go about understanding where gender and gender identity expressions come from? Okay. We talked about the biological approach, which focuses on hormonal levels. However, and we found that, biologically, there really is no one who is 100% male and 100% female. And what this largely ignores, though, is the external world influences on biological processes. because our external world can tell us something very different. Okay. Socio-cultural approach focuses on how culture and social settings determine sex differences. However, this ignores the hormonal and biological processes. As an example, it's changing now in American culture, but there's still a large population here in the United States that still believe that there's men and there's women, and that's it. And they completely ignore the hormonal and biological responses to environmental events, or the biological processes of gender. Because biologically, as I mentioned, when we look at things like hormone panels and those types of things, the whole idea that we're two dichotic genders is misses the point. Okay. We could look at the contemporary approach. This is study how both biological and socio-cultural mechanisms influence our psychological understanding of being maleness or femaleness. So this kind of tries to take in both perspectives. And that's kind of what we kind of have been talking about in a sense, okay? And we should talk a little bit about the examples of interplay between biology and our social world. And we can talk about things like female menstruation, okay? And I have brought this up in my psychology classes, and I believe I brought this up in my marriage and family class, that there's some things we have to recognize about puberty. And I may have brought this up here before too. But if when we look at here in the United States and we look at puberty, we see that both males and females are going through it younger and younger and younger, okay? Most studies focus on menstruation, which is the first menstrual cycle a female goes through. But it is important to understand that puberty is about a 2 to 3 year process. Now, the reason why most studies are done with females is because the point of puberty, we would say for males, is, I don't know why it's defined this way, but it's the first time they masturbate due to some erotic image instead of it just feeling good. So if you can imagine, the studies for men is a little bit more difficult than for women, where you can have clearly see a biological event occur, okay? We should note that here in the United States, puberty is getting younger and younger and younger. And I do think I did mention this in this class once, that, we see young girls going through their first menstrual cycle at around the age of 5. I think the youngest person was 4. When I worked with children who had been sexually abused, my youngest survivor that got pregnant was 8, and she had her first baby at the age of 9. And so we're seeing this getting younger and younger and younger. And the only explanation we have is that there has to be some environmental cause. There has to be something going on, okay? We do see in a lot of studies that there's definitely social cultural determinants. So when we look at post-industrial societies, we see that the average age is around 12. But when we go to more agriculture and more highland secluded societies, more rural societies, the ages get older and older and older. So for example, in the excluded environments of Papua New Guinea and in the high altitudes of Nepali group, the average age is around 18, okay? And we see this across, these are 2 extreme examples, but we see women raised in more urban environments going through menstruation at younger ages, whereas women who are more in rural environments go through menstruation at older ages. But there's also other common things that also influence when a female goes through her first menstruation. We have found that if there's an absent father, the female will go through it at a younger age. If there is an emotional distance between mother and daughter, they'll go through it at an earlier age. Exposure to family conflict, emotional issues like depression. We find that this changes the age of menstruation for a lot of these groups of individuals that experience these things. The two that probably stand out most in most of the research is having an absent father and an emotionally distant mother. That those seem to be the two biggest psychosocial stressors that influence when a female will go through menstruation. Okay. There has been a lot of questions lately because of how young we're seeing some women, young girls, go through the menstrual cycle, that maybe it's due to the sexualization of children. But this one is still a question mark, because there was a time period where young girls were born as a sexual creature. Don't mean to make that sound rude or anything, but both boys and girls were. I mean, there was a time in our history that's only about 200 or so years ago where children were seen as not being children. They were born as adults and they were just waiting for their physical body to catch up, okay? But in the last 250 years, we've started to see childhood as a unique developmental period. And so our version of sexualization of children has changed. And so this is still a question that a lot of anthropologists and psychologists and sociologists are trying to figure out. But I'm kind of curious to see what you all think. Do you think today's environment in which children are being raised, what do you think is probably the most, in your opinion, I'm not asking for science or anything, in your opinion, what do you all think the biggest psychosocial stressors are on children and when they go through puberty?
I would have to say maybe absent father.
Mm-hmm. I see Marissa saying the same thing. I will say that that has been probably in the research literature the biggest correlate for sure. Okay. Okay. I think you're all getting on this. So exposure. Mm-hmm. And Clarice, this is kind of an interesting thing because on the exposure, I'm assuming you're talking the exposure to family conflict. This can either have an either or influence on puberty. Family conflict can either make it so a person goes through puberty at a younger age or a later age. So that one's actually kind of an interesting variable. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. So we do know, so we've been talking about environmental influences on children and gender, but there are also in some cases biological influences on gender, okay? And a specific disorder, it's not very prevalent, but it exists, is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, okay? And this is when a female is exposed to high levels of adrenal hormones during prenatal development. And I will say sometimes it's just due to Sometimes it can be due to things mom is doing. But a lot of times it is just something that hormonally goes wrong between the mother's biology and the developing fetus, okay? But what we find is girls with CHA are biological female, and they'll actually identify as female, but show preferences for boyish attributes, such as preferences for male toys, increased activities, and engagement in rough and tumble play. So the point of this in bringing this disorder up is I've been noting the influence of culture and social on a child's identity and their behaviors. But we also have to note that in some cases, it can be caused by hormonal imbalances that occur during the development of the fetus in mom's womb. And to Sheena, yeah, tomboy, this is a type of tomboy behavior because it is someone, you know, and when we think of a tomboy, it is still a female who usually is attracted to males, but due to usually some type of biological or adrenal issue, they have very male attributes. So that's a good term, popular term for someone who has had this congenital adrenal disorder. So yeah. So this is the influence of biology on our gender. Okay. And to really understand it from a cultural perspective, I want to just take a few minutes to talk about distal and proximal causes of sex differences, okay? Distal explains the overall arcing reasons for sex differences. So when we talk about distal differences between the sexes, we're going to be talking about the influence of culture, which includes attitudes towards male-female roles. It includes in a lot of cases, religious beliefs. It includes all of those things that center around the view of reproduction within a culture. Proximal causes are more immediate reasons for sex differences. This is the specific medias that we're exposed to, the survival mechanisms that we deal with, okay? So distal, if you want to think about distal, is if you were an alien from another planet first visiting Earth, what would you observe as men and women go through their day-to-day activities? This would be an example of distal views of gender. So I'm kind of interested. So I'm just wondering, I'd like you to all put yourselves as aliens. You know nothing about human beings, but you're just coming to visit. What would be the things that you would most recognize when you were observing the human male, female, men, women behaviors? What kind of differences or similarities do you think you would see being an alien who has never come to Earth before? Any thoughts? Well, think about that mind experiment when you're thinking about these issues of gender, because they're kind of interesting when you really sit down and think about them. Okay. Some of the things that probably would be noticed is things like division of labor based on biological efficiencies, okay? Meaning that, traditionally, even though it's changing, we would probably see more males in things like construction and those types of fields, where we would see women in more service type of fields, where their biology really excels. Okay, so we'd probably see a division of labor based upon appearance. And those types of things are really some of the differences that we might notice if we were just a foreign entity just coming in and viewing human behavior. Okay, so those are just some examples. Proximal causes are things like hormonal changes and gender identity and stereotype expectations. Okay, and we've talked quite a bit about identity and hormonal changes, but we haven't talked much about stereotypical expectations. So for example, in gender roles, we often genderize young children. So we see social roles go into gender roles, which then go into stereotypical behaviors and schemas. And these are very much a socialized things. Today, traditionally, we see dressing boys in blue and dressing girls in pink because we think pink's a girl color, but blue's a boy color. Does anybody know where that actually comes from, though? Our perception that blue is for boys and pink is for girls. Any guesses?
I'm not exactly sure where it originated or where it came from, but I do know and I have heard that it was swapped before. So, the boys were pink and the girls were blue.
And you're absolutely right. The actual reason why we have blue for boys and pink for girls is because of a Sears Roebuck catalog in 1930, when they first were able to do a few color advertisements in Sears Roebuck. They colored girls pink and boys blue, but before 1930s and before the Sears Roebuck catalog, just as you mentioned, pink was actually a male color and blue was a female color. Because of, again, culture, pink is a much harder color to develop than is blue. So it was seen as more, manly because it was more rare than being able to produce the color blue. But it was actually Sears Roebuck catalog that changed that gender role for color, which I think emphasizes this idea that a lot of our gender roles and stuff are really determined by more of a cultural view than we would say is a natural thing, where pink is a softer color, as we would say today, and blue is a more masculine color. And all of those were perceptions shaped by a Sears Roebuck catalog, which I think is fascinating. And of course, boys we get them the trucks, and girls, we get them the dolls and all those types of things. Now, I wonder if this brings us up. Okay, so let's just go through a couple questions. How do gender roles differ from other roles we have in life, such as parents, occupation, leisure time roles? And a few of them is that those really determine those parental occupational roles that we enter into. And that's why gender is kind of an important topic to really look at, especially as we mentioned earlier in this class. A lot of the gender roles are are really being challenged today, to where a lot of males, as defined by gender, are finding it hard to have a place in the modern parenting world and occupational role, because those privileges, and I'm going to use that word very clearly, those privileges they once had as males are being seen as not necessarily privileges. Okay. Gender roles determine what one should do and not what someone ought to do. And I think, again, this was brought out by the video of demise of guys that we looked at earlier in the semester, where we saw that a lot of us psychologists and sociologists are thinking that the current issues we're having with men is they're still being told what they should do, but no one's telling them what they ought to do or giving them direction in who they can be. Because a lot of the traditional raising that's still happening with males says that they should be the breadwinner, quote unquote. They should be the dominant person in a relationship. They're telling those things that they should be, not necessarily what they ought to be for it to be a good partner and a good provider and family, part of the family system, okay? What have we found about this? Okay, so what are some of the things in this, and I think this highlights this again, is regardless of one's belief about gender roles, okay, is that there's still this belief that men are more agentic, and women are more communal, meaning agentic, meaning that masterful, assertive, competitive, and dominant, and women are friendly, unselfish, concerned with others, and emotionally expressive. So men should be masculine, strong, and tall. Women should be pretty, sexy, and petite. And gender roles and emotional expressions, we feel that women have the ability to have a lot more emotions. These are the top ones: sadness, embarrassment, fear, distress, sympathy, and love and happiness. And men, anger and pride. And I just want to explain where this research comes from, because these stereotypes can be observed both explicitly and implicitly, okay? So for example, research we'll get when we get to human attraction. When we measure, for example, what a woman is looking for in a male partner, and when some women will say, I want someone who is sensitive, kind, sweet, and the like. But then when we show images of men and women, men that are either very, very masculine and dominant or very submissive faces, women on an implicit level will still rate the dominant masculine face as more attractive than the sweet, sensitive face. And so when we talk about stereotype behavior being both explicit and implicit, we can still measure these gender expressions and what women and men view as stereotyped, as you would say. And we can measure it either by people just saying yes. For example, a woman may say that they like a dominant man, but we know even on an implicit level, a lot of women who say that they want a soft, sensitive man will still rate a masculine, dominant man as more attractive. Okay, but we'll get more to that when we get to human attraction and we start talking about that a little bit more, probably starting next week. But we can measure it the other direction, by the way. So there are some other studies that we'll get to with human attraction that show even men who say that they're attracted to what they would consider an equal partner with equal duties and all that, will still rate women who seem more submissive and as more attractive. Okay. And so we'll get to those two. So I want to make sure you know that it goes both ways as a view. Okay. So I think in the end, what we do need to understand is that based on that agenic versus communal thing, we do have to understand that culture is very complex. In fact, Ashmore in 2003, based on just those two variables, suggested that there can be over 200 subtypes under each of these categories that is bound by the following interaction: our gender, the culture we come from, the roles and the expectations, and yes, even our age. All interact to create almost 200 different subtypes of what you would consider gender based on this agenic communal type of influence. And we do need to understand that, you know, this is one of the first qualities that we instill in children, even though we know that children are what would be considered androgynous until the age of about 6 to 8. Okay. Believe it or not, if we did not stereotype our children, we didn't dress girls in girl clothes and boys in boy clothes, and we gave them the same haircuts and everything else, we wouldn't actually be able to tell the difference between our daughters and our sons until around the age of 6 to 8. But it is our genderization as children are born that start that process. And that's why gender is so important within our culture, cultures, I should say, and plays such a pivotal role. Okay, I'm actually going to stop here. And I want to ask, based on today's conversation, does anybody have any questions? All right, I'm not hearing any. That's okay. Y'all can be quiet. So now where are we heading with this conversation? So we started with our first primary influence. And so what we're going to start on next week is we're going to start on a conversation about culture. Because what we're building to is we have that biology propensity, and we talked about it with gender, and we saw how it interacted with our social world and with our cultured world. So now let's build it up some more. And next week we will talk about culture and how culture influences how we express ourselves socially and how we come about doing that. Oh no, Frank. Wow. Is there any questions you might have in the chat, or are you good? Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Well, I think we should call it a night for tonight. We've been going at it pretty good for tonight. And I think we should all have a good evening, and I look forward to seeing what you all think about this in your weekly reflections. So have a good evening, and we will see you all next Tuesday.